Welcome everyone! Today I'll be pulling back the curtain a bit on how top game studios stay ahead through iterative testing, leaving many studios in the dust. Sounds a bit dramatic, but often that's the key ingredient to a hit. Let's kick it off by diving in on what we'll be tackling today. In this session, I'll be covering why integrating testing into your strategy is an absolute game changer, real stories from times in my career where testing turned near disasters into massive wins, how to build a blueprint that fuels hits, the secret weapon for making smarter decisions, and ultimately, how can you apply all of this to your own games starting today? By the end of this, my goal is simple. You'll leave with at least one testing idea you can begin exploring right away. Now let's kick things off with a little exercise. This is a very common fork in the road. You're in a meeting debating a creative decision, and it can feel like a gamble because oftentimes it is. How often have you relied on instinct, a gut feeling, or just a quick team vote to decide on creative direction? Now, imagine going into that decision with confidence because it's backed by real player data. I'm going to utilize PickFu throughout this presentation, and we'll get more into what that is, but at a top level, it's my go-to market research tool. It's fast, provides qualitative and quantitative data, and has the targeting I need to make quick decisions based on what my players want. So, let's put these icons to the test. If you had to pick one of these for a mobile cat cafe game, which one would it be? Go ahead and shout out your choice. Everyone here may have a different opinion or perspective, and that's exactly why testing is so important. Let's see how everyone stacked up. E is the winner, but by looking at it in just this dimension and calling it a winner, we're doing ourselves a disservice. Because the real question we want to answer is, what do our specific players want? Maybe your pick matches the test results, maybe it doesn't. But is that a risk you're really willing to take? We could be leaving a lot on the table by calling it a day. What if there was a version of this asset that could boost performance by an additional 15% had we just tested it? Or what if there was a creative red flag, something subtle and easy to miss, that tanks conversion once it goes live? We could have easily avoided this situation with a quick test. This is where PickFu changed the game for me. Instead of taking an educated guess and hoping for the best, or spending a considerable amount of time and budget on live optimization, I'm able to get clear answers and enter the market with pre-qualified assets and ideas. This ultimately reduces risk and saves money in addition to development time in a lot of cases. We'll take a deeper look at the data, but first, I want to give you a little context about who I am. I'm Bernardi. I've spent a little over 16 years in gaming, working across marketing, creative, and product organizations. I've been at startups, AAA studios, and virtually everything in between. What I pride myself on is building frameworks that guide teams to test, optimize, and refine assets and ideas, so we can make a smarter, data-driven decision instead of guessing our way through high-stakes choices. Testing isn't just something that I believe in. It's something I've seen change the game time and time again. And today, I want to show you exactly how you can use that to your advantage. Before we get back into our Cat Cafe poll and get into some of the targeting and segmentation, let's talk a bit more about what exactly PickFu is. PickFu is a tool I came across early in my career. I spent a lot of time at startups with no dedicated insights team, which meant I had to find my own path to get both qualitative and quantitative data fast. Click tests required fairly large budgets to reach a conclusion. Traditional surveys took too long, and finding custom panels was ultimately too costly. The sheer volume of things I needed to test just wasn't feasible with the budgets I had. And above all else, a lot of these methods slowed down the decision-making process. PickFu solved that for me. It's fast, highly targeted, and removes the need to source outside panels. Plus, it's simple enough for any team member to use, no matter their background. But why am I talking about it? I felt like studios were stuck in an outdated way of testing, and I needed something that could keep up with the pace I just talked about. Faster insights, the right audience, and real impact. Teams tend to default to long-form surveys and relying on an insights team to handle everything, which slows down decision making. It's a process that to me just doesn't fit the speed of modern marketing and product cycles. That pain point led me to PickFu, a tool that let me run tests in a way that actually matched the fast iterative nature of product and marketing teams that I was on. I needed results in hours, sometimes minutes, not days. The ability to quickly validate concepts, game features, and creative ideas completely changed how I approached marketing, game development, and creative. The TLDR here, PickFu sparked a testing renaissance at almost every studio I've been at. It helped me pull teams away from what I consider a bad habit, which is relying on purely gut instinct instead of validating ideas with data. That in itself was one of the biggest shifts, getting teams to move away from intuition-based decisions and instead embrace fast, actionable insights. Now that we've covered why PickFu changed the way I test, let's dive back into actual data from our Cat Cafe tests, starting first with the setup. As I said earlier, testing isn't just about picking a winner, it's about making sure the right people are choosing it. And right can look different depending on your marketing strategy, the age of your game, and many other variables. So that's why setting up the proper foundation is incredibly important. The base panel should always reflect who you're trying to attract. So naturally, in this case, we targeted mobile gamers. Another layer we want to consider is the reporting. We want to ensure reporting accurately reflects the unique aspects of our game and strategy. Some aspects to consider are genre, spend levels, or even how much time they actually spend gaming. If you're testing with the wrong audience or not drilling down into each segment, your results won't match up to the live data when an asset or a feature goes live. And ultimately, the data will be harder to action. A winning creative might not actually drive conversion if people choosing it don't reflect your real players or the audience you're trying to capture. Let's start breaking down exactly what this looks like in practice. Even when a creative seems like the clear favorite, we need to ask who is choosing it. We targeted mobile gamers, so everyone who took the test is somewhat pre-qualified, but let's dig a little bit deeper into their spending habits. So we can see here, option E performed well overall and when we filter by spender behaviors. This isn't always the case though. Just because a creative resonates overall doesn't mean it's optimized for revenue driving players. That's why we need to look at all of the different angles, not just about picking the best creative here. It's about finding the one that performs with the right players. Let's go another layer deeper. We know we're a simulation game, so the next logical step is to take a look at performance within that cohort. A creative that works for general mobile gamers might not necessarily work for our core audience. And what do we see? Performance trends hold steady. Option E is still dominating. That's a good sign. Does that mean we should stop there? No, because the best insights come from going deeper. What else can we analyze to make an even smarter decision? We've confirmed that simulation players favor option E. Before we lock in with E, let's keep pushing. What happens when we analyze votes by playtime habits? Do we see shifts between casual players and high engagement players? Here's where things start to get a little more interesting. Option C closes the gap with E for those who spend the most time gaming. Since we most definitely care about engaged gamers, this starts changing the picture and the next steps. We know that players who stick around longer tend to be the ones who spend. So at this point, I'd want to dig into the qualitative data, the comments, the why behind these choices. Are there elements of C that players love, but maybe it feels slightly off and it's bringing down performance? Could we refine E to make it even stronger using elements of C? Let's keep going. Numbers tell us what's working, but qualitative data tells us the why, and we can take that why into new iterations. Are they drawn to the design? Does it clearly convey the game's identity? Are there unexpected insights that could lead to an even stronger creative choice? This is where testing goes from being black and white to strategic refinement, adjusting, evolving, and getting closer to what players actually want. In this comment here, E is in the middle of the pack. So what takeaways could we bring to push performance even further? As we can see, cuteness was certainly a factor, but what else can we pull from the comments? When we start reading more of the comments, there's a common theme that starts emerging around perceived cuteness and some feedback around contrast and shape. But what else can we take away? In this specific comment, we see that active cats that are cooking or shopping indicate to the viewer that there could be a relative game mechanic. If this is something we know is in our game, maybe we start exploring there and begin to adapt our creative strategy as we refine into different pockets of audiences. But how do you adapt a strategy? If we're expanding our audience or marketing or on a mix of platforms, we don't just want to throw the same creative at everyone. Instead, we refine and test into those specific segments, finding the right creative for the right audience. As an example, we have a comment summary for each option, as you can see here with E. And so if we're looking to make specific changes to each icon to better capture different audience types, then we would utilize these to start making those changes. And this is usually where marketing can also tap in and share emerging audiences or their current targeting, so we can true that up to our panel and our reporting for the next round of tests. You can use feedback from each segment to start tailoring each individual creative, and so the iterative test cycle begins. Now that we've got our first test under our belts, let's look at the broader picture and better understand why top studios never launch untested. I've talked a lot about how testing refines strategy, but let's get real. What happens when you don't test? Data crushes gut instinct every time. It's easy to assume we know what will work, but without validation, even the best ideas have the potential to flop. Testing turns a hunch into a win. It takes the guesswork out of creative decisions and makes sure we're putting our resources where they actually move the needle. Before I dive into some real-world examples from my past, let's look at some hard data that shows exactly why testing is not optional. It's table stakes. Here are a few key stats I want to talk about. First, 45% of in-app purchase revenue comes from the top 2% of users. Are you actually resonating with them when you're executing a creative strategy? Unoptimized store creatives can tank conversion rates by up to 30%, and that is largely from just poor visuals or messaging, which can arguably be very easy to fix. Games that A/B test ad creative see up to 40% higher ROAS, because testing lets you stop wasting spend on underperforming ads and pre-vet concepts before marketing spend is ever applied. Iterative testing on app stores can boost installs by 15 to 20%. What are you leaving on the table by not optimizing with experiments? The takeaway for me here is testing is no longer a nice to have. It's the difference between a hit and a flop. Every top studio bakes testing into their strategy. Now let's take this out of theory and into practice. One of the first major tests that changed the way I think about testing came early in my career. I had no insights team and a big decision to make. Could adding a celebrity boost my game's performance? It was pretty high stakes in that it could potentially make or break the success of the game, so I had to get scrappy because we were a small startup at the time and this had to be successful for us to be around the next year. Utilizing PickFu paired with UA click tests, we were able to get a strong understanding of the types of audiences we'd be appealing to, general performance, and what sort of lift we could expect. And the data we got back was not subtle. We had an option that dominated nearly every segment, which ultimately led to a smash hit with a celebrity as the face. There are also cases where a series of small changes can build into huge wins that largely utilize things you already have. In this example from my past, we had an aging product that was on a downward turn and we needed to breathe life into it fast before it risked being sunset. We didn't have a lot of resources, so optimizing with what we already had was our best option to move quickly. We looked at all the core aspects of all of our creative, which ultimately fell into two buckets: characters and unique selling points, which made up the majority of our App Store and UA creative. With a few rounds of testing characters, messaging, and just standard gameplay screenshots, we were able to quickly address a lot of the low-hanging fruit, such as featuring our strongest characters in the icon, leading with our strongest USPs, which at the time were featured in one of our last screenshots. From there, we were able to set a path forward to growing the game again, and even today, it's still thriving. The key to this, knowing which changes actually matter. That's one of the many reasons why we test, to identify the areas that are bringing down metrics and diagnose them. With tests to get the why and identify the key themes within different audience segments so we can move forward in a strong way. Then there are moments where it's not just about fine-tuning, it's about making a massive creative pivot. Testing doesn't just validate, it helps uncover hidden opportunities. In this case, we had a game in development and already set up for success with what I like to call a test and learn loop. They would ideate on art styles, get feedback, apply it to the art, and then see if there was a lift or a dip. In this case though, while they were doing a lot of the things right, the changes just weren't big enough. Every test tied, and there were no big shifts in sentiment. We needed to do a massive pivot. So I suggested trying vastly different concepts to see if their current hero art style was just truly the best. And I think we were all pretty shocked with the results. The new style swept the old in every segment, which allowed us to lock in and start exploring even more unique concepts, which ultimately tested us into a very successful launch and reception. From these stories, I'm sure you can see it's a balance, not a one-size-fits-all type of situation. Another common concept in my past is how to best identify the right IP for a game. Let's take a look at that in practice. IP-based games are surprisingly underutilized, yet an incredibly powerful strategy. It's a move I've seen have a massive positive impact for games I've worked on. Before we get into the story, I want to highlight something interesting I found on Sensor Tower's blog. At the time this report was made, only 9% of mobile games used an IP. Why I bring this up is because those games accounted for nearly a quarter of the total revenue. To me, that means studios that bet big on the right IP see massive returns. This also tells me that testing, in this case, is key to figuring out the right partnership between IP and game type. There was a point in my career where we had identified a winning formula with our core game type, and we wanted to explore IP licensing for a reskin. We wanted to understand if it was a risk worth taking and also get an idea of the audiences we could tap into, especially ones that would not cannibalize our existing audience. We did a study on our current player base, then looked at pockets and areas of opportunity for emerging markets. From there, we used that to inform our test panel and our reporting. And ultimately, we were able to reduce a lot of risk by licensing an IP, going into the deal that we already knew the type of audience we'd be attracting, what type of conversion to expect, and we came locked and loaded with a full soft launch strategy. And this was prior to the ink even being dry. I definitely would not have wanted to go into that with a guess, especially since the wrong decision could have hurt not just this new title, but our existing games in our portfolio. So now that we've talked through some practical applications from my past career, let's talk about how this can be applied as a framework. A single test is great, but it's the studios that build an iterative test loop that win long term. And how do you do this? Taking a page from science, we first create a hypothesis. What bets are we wanting to take and validate? From there, we'll want to build a research stack to execute with. What are all the different types of tests we'll want to execute? Polls, surveys, A/B tests. Then we execute those tests with a plan to evaluate the data, translate that into iterations, and then rinse and repeat this cycle to scale. Think of testing as a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. It's not just about running a bunch of isolated tests, it's about building loops to build on your performance. Let's see how we can apply this on a larger scale. Here, we have the entire development life cycle of a game broken into stages. The way I like to think about it is games aren't static and neither are your players. What works today might not work tomorrow, and it especially won't next month, quarter, or year. That's why iterative testing is so important. Think of it like checking in with your audience. Let's talk about some of these stages, first with inception. At this point, you're really trying to understand your market. Before anything gets built, you need to know, who is this game for? What problem does it solve? Testing at this stage helps to find core ideas and create a foundation of buildable learnings as we move through these different stages. Then we move into concept development. Now that you've validated the problem spaces with the target audiences you're going after, now we can start testing the solutions in the way of features, art styles, and even early positioning to see what resonates before investing too much into development. From there, we start hardening the product as we move into prototyping and design. At this stage, we want to optimize the UI UX to see if the features are translating into usable, intuitive ways. If your menus, onboarding flow, or controls don't click, you can problem solve and test now so it's not something you're finding out at launch. Then moving into development, even while engineering is moving through sprints, you can continue to test key elements that make it to future sprints or later in the roadmap to avoid costly reworks down the line. Then we move into beta and pre-launch. This is usually where most teams know to start testing, either in tertiary markets or the App Store and so forth. At this stage, A/B testing and beta feedback guide final optimizations. What do players love? What needs refining? Now is the time to really tighten the screws. Then lastly, there's launch and post-launch. This is where iterative test loops are now formed as testing doesn't stop. You'll want to continuously optimize. Live ops, new features, new creatives, and anything that has a home in your product or your marketing can all benefit from ongoing iterative testing to keep engagement high and pre-qualify future assets and ideas before they're ever consumer facing. The key takeaway here is testing is not a one and done event. The best teams integrate it at every stage. It's very hard to get it right the first time. And even if you do, there's always room for improvement. So nothing should stop you from beginning to build that muscle. Let's look at some different ways different ideas for things you could test right now. A lot of the friction I've gotten in the past was coming from a place of thinking testing slows you down. This might have been true, but as we talked about earlier, once I've discovered PickFu, now tests take minutes and can save thousands of dollars in bad decisions. Here are 4 that you could run today. An icon test. Does your app icon stand out from the competition? Furthermore, are there different color schemes, characters, facial expressions, or art styles that could boost performance? Another quick win that requires no creator support is a screenshot order test. Are you leading with your best screenshots of all of the OSPs, featured gameplay, characters? Are they the ones that your potential audience cares about the most? What about testing your current creative? As I'm sure a lot of us know, especially with video ads, there's very little time to capture attention. So why not run a first 5-second ad test? Are your ads hooking players? Are there ways where you can front load those hooks and try a lot of different iterations of the same video to get a better read of what will stop someone from scrolling? For anyone affecting the roadmap, what about validating a feature concept or a solution that you've ideated on? This could easily validate if you're on the right track and surface some insights that could strengthen it or even get you moving in a different direction. Because now that we're out of the habit of just doing one singular test, every test is no longer so precious because these take less than an hour. You can run as many as you'd like, and they're not very expensive. I commonly hear that testing is just for UA or marketing teams, but it's truly for everyone. Creative directors, get real feedback before you lock in your art styles. Marketing managers, lower your CPI by testing ads like we just talked about, and then you spend big. Product managers, validate features before they enter into development. Are you inspired to start testing? Swing by PickFu's booth and take a page from some of my suggestions to get instant feedback on one of your game's elements. The bottom line, testing turns good ideas into great results. Don't leave it to chance. Put it to the test. Thank you for your time.